Hi, Clark. I've been thinking about you lately, and as you recall, we've had a few open questions. And I know that you're pressed for time and all that, so I thought I'd reduce it down to three questions I think that are very easily understandable, and that are B, of some importance in your line of work, the philosophy of Christianity and so forth. And one I asked you originally in March of this year, and I want to ask that one again, and I want to ask two more. And I think you should find them of interest, and I want to tell you something about the questions themselves and also the parameters in which an answer can be given that I would consider reasonable. You'll see what I mean in a moment. The first question concerns sorrow in heaven. Imagine there is a heaven, the heaven that you described, and that's free of sorrow. Imagine that your entire family, your wife and your two daughters and your grandkids, and they all reject Christianity at some point in their lives, and imagine that you outlive them all, and you now don't know that they're in hell, which would cause you great sorrow. I mean, if your point of view is correct. If you go to heaven, having been a good Christian, how could there be a heaven without sorrow if you're aware that your loved ones, while you enjoy heaven, roast in hell for eternity? I think it's not just another argument. What makes this question, which by the way Matt Dillahunty asked for the first time, what makes it stand out? There's a host of arguments for and a host of arguments against theism, such as the problem of evil, and tombs of books have been written on this, or the problem of free will, or the problem of lack of free will, or what have you, morality, you name it. The Kalam cosmological argument, tombs of reams and reams of things have been written on both sides of these issues. So even though I don't find your position particularly convincing, I can see that you have some answers for them at any rate. However, to this defeater argument, the argument from sorrow, from the logical disability for there to be a heaven created that's logically coherent, where there is no sorrow. If when you go to heaven, you're aware of your loved ones, and if they are in hell, then obviously you worry about them. Hence, you have sorrows. That's a defeater argument. It's something that certainly needs to be addressed. It seems to be sound and valid to me, but you should, I think, address this, and it should be fairly high on your list of priorities. I mean, if you cannot disprove this, and if it were to actually be true, there'd be no heaven, there'd be no ascension of Jesus to heaven, there would be no resurrection. The rest of the house of cards, if you will, it just falls, it tumbles. So I'm curious as to your answer to this one. The second question is currently viral on Twitter. It concerns the following scenario. Imagine then that you're in a fertility clinic of some sort. It's a thought experiment, a Gedankenexperiment. Imagine you're in a fertility clinic, and the fertility clinic, there's a fire breaking out, and you can flee. But on your way out, you come by this room, and in one corner of the room, there's a 5-year-old girl crying. She's trapped. You could save her. On the other side of the room, there's a container containing 1,000 viable embryos. Which one would you save? And the reason why this Twitter went viral is because the guy who wrote it, he said, well, I've asked this question to the thousands of theists, but I've never gotten a straight answer. It's a binary problem. You can either save the little girl or a container containing 1,000 viable embryos. So whatever explanation you may have for whichever choice you make, you have 3 seconds to make a choice. It must be either or it must be either the one, the girl, or the container with 1,000 embryos. So a non-theist has no problem answering this. You'd say, well, obviously I have to save the little girl, because if I don't save the little girl, I'm a psychopath, I'm a sociopath, I'm a fucking maniac, if you forgive the French. No one in their sane mind will leave a little girl in that room, which can only lead to a conclusion that an embryo is neither ethically nor morally nor biologically in any way, shape, or form the same as a live little girl, which this little thought experiment seems to prove. So I'm curious how you would choose. Would you choose the little girl, or would you choose the container with 1,000 embryos? And then, of course, why? And lastly, the last question I'd like to ask you is a question of my own, and that concerns another thought experiment. It's not, don't worry, it's not a card trick. Let's say somebody, this is not a card trick, I'm just using the cards to illustrate. Somebody comes up to you and says, you know what, I believe there is a revealed God. And I have heard from many people that they have books, and these books are divinely inspired. Let's say he brought along 4 books that he's been reading, but the covers have been worn off. There are no covers; they're just blank covers. And you have to give him a metric, something that he has to apply to each of these books that claim to be divinely inspired, and that metric, that test, has to reveal which ones are in fact divinely inspired, if any. And that test, obviously, I'm curious about, because you must have such a test, and that test lets all the other books, the Vedas, the Quran, the Book of Mormon, whatever other book claims to be divinely inspired, that they all fail that test apparently, and only the Bible passes that test. That test I have yet to see, but you clearly must have one, and I'm curious to see what that test might be. And I do hope that you find these questions interesting, if nothing else. If you yourself don't have a question, particularly one about sorrow and heaven, feel free to ask your friends, Bill Craig, or whomever else you want to. I think these do raise some interesting questions on the theist-atheist issue, or the theist-naturalist issue. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to ask anytime. I do occasionally miss our conversations. They were always, to me at least, they were quite enjoyable. And I'm going to say hi to you and to Anne. I wish you guys all the best, and hopefully we'll have one of our discussions again sometime soon. See you later. Bye-bye.